All right. I was not stream. I thought I was streaming for like a half hour. I sat sitting here talking, and I forgot to push the go live button to start streaming. Anyway, well, I'm just taking a look at Google Earth here. It has a very interesting feature where you can look at a spot on Earth and you can take a look back at pictures from earlier in time. For example, August 2023 at this little school called Hale Abdul Hamid Secondary School. It's probably a better perspective angle on it, but it appears to be um, a little secondary school. They've got a big green garden yard, kind of playground, some trees out here. And around them appear to be a lot of houses, apartment buildings, maybe. Not quite sure. This longer buildings could be some kind of markets or supermarkets or something. Oh, we got basketball court or soccer field kind of thing. And I got this cloud kind of covering up a lot of the details here. Let's take it back even further. We'll go to August 10th. Maybe that cloud won't be there. There we go. There's a mosque over here. Enhance. Can we enhance? Not really. Alright, so this was on 2023, October 10th. So, by the way, we've got this street with a little roundabout here. And then we've got our school and the little soccer field, little athletic center there. Let's jump forward in time a little bit. Here we are, about a half a year ago, December 1st, 2024. That whole paved street is completely gone, right? Like there's still a sort of pathway here, but it's not paved anymore. This is all gone. This athletic center, the field is completely destroyed. The school completely destroyed. All the houses and apartments around them, businesses completely destroyed. The whole everything's gone. Let's take that back again. Let's take it back. What was over here? Fucking farms. Is that farms? Could they be growing stuff? Kind of look like farms and crops to me. Look at that. Look at that. Lots of farms. Oh my god. You seeing this shit? Farms and fields to grow their food, to feed their kids, to go to school. These solar panels? Fucking sick. Fucking solar panels. Keep the lights on. Let's see it today. That's what it looks like today. That's what they did to it. That's what it is today now. Fucking tire tracks and tank tracks. Fucking ashes. Fucking blood. They just tore it all up. They just ripped it all up. What is this? Just a little bit of green? I kind of missed a little spot here. This tiny little chunk. That's all that's left. Okay, so what happened here, and happened like times 1,000, has been done, is being done by Israel with the support of the USA and the support of the UK. And the Western media is running cover for it, or they're minimizing it, or they're burying it, or they're afraid to talk about it. And it's happening right now, even more and more and more and more. And the people here are starving. They're being starved. And this is just the worst moral failing and atrocity that I could have imagined that I would live through. Nobody has the excuse that they didn't know about it. It's being live streamed every day. We're here. You can still hear. I just watched a live stream with someone in Gaza. They're telling us exactly what's happening. There's 2 million people here. So anyway, this is why. Oh man, this whole I had a whole thing that I said when I wasn't, when I thought I was streaming, I wasn't streaming. Thought I was streaming, but I wasn't even streaming. All right. Well, here's the thing that I'm gonna say. This is gonna be the theme of hour 2. Hour 2. It's not complicated. There's just a lot to talk about. Let's just say that there's just a lot to unpack. And I used a metaphor, an analogy, which is that of tangled up cables. Imagine you have a big bundle of crazy cables going this way and that way and which way and what way. And you take the time to slowly and meticulously untangle the cables. Well, at the end, you might find it's just simple. It's just this end goes to that end. Bada bing, bada boom. What was all this other stuff? Oh, these were just cables without purpose that were mixed and tangled in just to confuse you. All right? So what we do is we untangle the bullshit so that we can reveal the simplicity of what's underneath. It's not complicated. There's just a lot to unpack. Let's go with untangle. Untangle. And let's select a different font. It's not complicated, there's just a lot to untangle. So that's what I want people to remember. Especially when it comes to the Israel-Palestine issue. It's really not complicated. And like, if someone's like, I want to be pro-Palestine, but I have like one hang up, like, that is one thing to untangle, right? There's probably some misunderstanding. The most common would probably be, I don't want to appear anti-Semitic. All right? So how do we untangle that? We have to remember that, like, categories of things, and remember to keep those terms consistent and logical. Okay? An anti-Semite is someone who hates Jewish people or has like a fear or strong prejudice against all Jewish people. Being anti-Semitic also comes along with a great history of conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory and anti-Semitism are this kind of peaches and cream combo that crops up a lot on the dessert tray of life, okay? And it is actually poisonous. So these are like poison peaches and rancid cream. But they seem to always arrive concurrently. There's a big relationship between them, okay? Because it might be a bit different from what we would just call as racism, where there's, I don't know. I feel like at least people who are like white supremacist, anti-Semitic, generally talk about Jews as being sort of outside of their community, but out, controlling somewhere, pulling the strings. They're always behind the scenes. And they're sort of, they're I guess recognized as being a higher class, having more money or whatever. So I think for that reason it sort of lends itself to conspiracy thinking, because they're not necessarily interacting with Jewish people on a daily basis. They're more just like reading and imagining about Jewish people. If that makes sense. I don't know. In those anti-Semitic, white supremacist conspiracy theory circles, they have all kinds of really fucked up, discredited literature the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, for example. And it's this big long book that pretends to be written by Jewish people stating like the goals of the Zionists, of the Jews. And it's like makes them sound super evil and fucked up, right? That's the basics of it. It's like a big book that says what our bad plans to do are by the Jews, and then it's like we're gonna be so bad, we're gonna do the worst shit, and we're gonna take over the world. And it was very stupid and obviously fake, and even proven to be a hoax many times over. So the type of people who would still reference it or talk about it or take it seriously whatsoever are going to be these conspiracy weirdos who, like, you know, if something's been debunked, like, that means it's extra true. I should start debunking truth shit just to make those guys, like, believe truth shit just as a joke, as a prank. But anyway. So yeah, these anti-Semitic conspiracy weirdos will cite sources like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion or other shit like that. And they are trying to make it a racial thing, an ethnic thing, that anyone who is Jewish is like untrustworthy or something. It's all nonsense. It's all racist crap. And it's based in conspiracy thinking. That's generally what, like, right-wing anti-Semitism is. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get this exactly correct, but Semites, is a kind of a word that was put on people who speak a Semitic language. Right? So, if we look at Semite, a member of any of the peoples who speak or spoke a Semitic language, including the Jews and the Arabs. So anti-Semitic right-wingers also don't like Arabs. And they also don't like Muslims. Not all Arabs are Muslim. I think a great majority of them are, but a lot of them are Jewish and a lot of them are Christian too. But the number, I think the Muslim numbers are higher amongst Arabs. That's just a guess. I don't have a source on that. So, if you are pro-Palestine, are you anti-Semitic? No. You're pro-Semitic. Because you are pro-Arabs. Arabs and Jews together are Semites. They're Semitic. So, no, you're not being anti, you're being the opposite. You're being pro-Semitic. You want them to be free. We want the Semitic people there to be free. So that's one line of argument. Another thing is that when you're pro-Palestine, that means you are anti-Zionist. And while many Jewish people are Zionists, many more people are Zionists and are Christians. Let's make an example with the good old Venn diagram. Good old Benjamin diagram, okay? Let's imagine this circle represents the ideology of Zionism. Let's do this. I'm gonna make it look like it's permeable, because it is. It's not a permanent characteristic of a person that you have to be to hold this belief, to live by the principle of Zionism. Because who else is included? Who could be included? Really, anybody. We have one very large group of people who are Zionists, who are evangelical Christians. Huge number of them are. Okay? Evangelical Christians represent huge numbers of Zionists and huge bunches of money towards Zionist causes. They're all in the USA. Now, there's also a lot of Israelis who, in fact, by definition, according to Israeli law, are Jews. Okay? Maybe I should make this blue. Just to keep track of it. Some of those Israelis, I guess, can't be Christian. They have to be Jewish. Right? And I think, oops. I'm going to leave, I don't know. This might be a question. Should I leave a little sliver outside of the Zionist? Probably should. I don't know, though. There's a good argument that if you're outside of this, you're no longer Israeli. Because within Israelis, we also have, above Israeli, we also have the wider category of Jewish people. Now, some Jewish people could be Israeli. Many are not. Some might be not Israeli and also be Zionist. Let's do it like this, maybe. Okay, so this circle includes all the Jewish people. The blue circle represents Israelis. The black circle represents Zionists. Right? And we could put other circles around here. It's going to be the same thing, more or less. Like this could be our Arabs. Right? There might be a few Zionist Arabs. And Jewish Arabs. And Jewish Zionist Arabs. And non-Jewish Zionist non-Arabs. This is Muslim. Right? So these are Muslim. These are Jewish people. The blue is Israel specifically. All right. So if you say, I'm anti-Zionist, does that mean I'm anti-Jewish people? Does it mean I'm anti-Israeli? Yes. If you're anti-Zionist, you got to be anti-anything in this circle, which is pretty much all Israel. There are people who are in Israel who are not Zionists. So we do leave a little sliver there for them. But it's not enough to make a a strong political movement. There's no actual energy there. So if you're in this black circle, and you know what? I just noticed something. You could be a Christian and a Jew, technically. They're called Messianic Jews. They're basically just evangelical Christians who have Jewish heritage and want to continue doing a lot of the Jewish traditions, but also they want to be Christians. So yeah, there's a little overlap there. And honestly, that group probably could be. They don't have to be Zionist. This is like a downfall in this, because Messianic Christians, Messianic Jewish people could not. They don't have to be Zionist. Nobody has to be Zionist. You can get out of there. You can just get out of there, and you could be atheist. You know, we could add every other kind of religion on this, and it's going to look basically the same, right? Remember, this is a Venn diagram where the dotted line is permeable. It's something you could get out of, right? This is the atheists. There's non-religious atheist people who are Zionists. Okay, so yeah, this is what it is. If you're anti-Zionist, you're anti anything inside of this black circle, which includes some of every religion, but a good big chunk of Christians. Of all the Zionists in the world, Christians make up the vast majority of them. So this is like, no, when I'm anti-Zionist, I'm anti-Israel because it's an ethno-state founded on genocide and stolen land. The whole government there needs to step down. They need to be collapsed, and they need to give the right of return to Palestinians and give them full citizenship, and kick all the fucking settlers out. That's just the only moral position. Whether or not it's something I think is going to happen in my lifetime, I fucking hope so. But whether or not it's going to happen, that's literally the only just thing that can happen. There's no justice until Israel is gone and Palestine is free. Sorry. Not saying there's going to be justice. Justice is kind of hard to come by. So anyway, we're gonna do hour 2. We're gonna start hour 2, and hour 2 kind of starts in the middle of Rabbani talking his shit. Go on, man, talk your shit. So we're gonna hear him talk his shit and all that. All right, here we go.
That it is essential to remove the existing population from Palestine.
Can I respond to this?
In a moment, please. He says we shall have to spirit the penniless population across the borders and procure employment for them elsewhere or something. And Israel's Anglo, who you mentioned, a land without a people for a people without a land. They knew damn well it wasn't a land without a people. I'll continue, but please go ahead.
Just to this, there is a one small diary entry in Herzl's vast
It's 5
diary.
volumes.
Yeah, 5 volumes. There's one paragraph which actually mentions the idea of transfer. There are people who think that Herzl was actually pointing to South America when he was talking about that. The Jews were going to move to Argentina, and then they would try and buy out or buy off or spirit the penniless natives to make way for Jewish settlement. Maybe he wasn't even talking about the Arabs in that particular passage. That's the argument of some people. Maybe he was, but the point is, it has only a 1/100th of a 1% of the diary which is devoted to the subject. It's not a central idea
I'll
in
defer.
Herzl's thinking. What Herzl wanted, and this is what's important, not Rhodes. I don't think he was the model. Herzl wanted to create a liberal, democratic, Western state in Palestine for the Jews. That was the idea. Not some imperial enterprise serving some imperial master, which is what Rhodes was about, but to have a Jewish state which was modeled on the Western democracies in Palestine. And this, incidentally, was more or less what Weizmann and Ben-Gurion wanted. Ben-Gurion was more of a socialist, Weizmann was more of a liberal Westerner, but they wanted to establish a social democratic or liberal state. State in Palestine, and they both envisioned through most of the years of their activity that there would be an Arab minority in that Jewish state. It's true that Ben-Gurion strived to have as small as possible an Arab minority in the Jewish state, because he knew that if you want a Jewish majority state, that would be necessary. But it's not something which they were willing to translate into actual policy.
Just a quick pause to mention that for people who are not familiar, Theodor Herzl, we're talking about over a century ago. And everything we've been talking about has been mostly 1948 and before.
Yes. Just one clarification.
Lex. Again, galaxy brains. So Theodor Herzl indeed was writing more than a century ago, over a century ago. What was the... I don't remember. He died in 1904. So his writings and shit would have been in, the early 1900s at the latest. So good job, man. What these guys are talking about the philosophy of the early Zionist thinkers that led up to this whole thing. That's what you asked for, buddy. That's what you asked for on your first question, an hour ago. And you haven't really changed the topic. But it was never adopted as policy. But yeah. So he's like, hey, I read the diaries of Theodor Herzl, and all this stuff. He's like, can I respond to that? They're going on. So we're talking about over a century ago, and everything we've been talking about is mostly 1948 and before. Is he implying that we should get to what happened in 1948 about the Nakba itself? Possibly. Maybe he just wants everything to move forward. But he's going to give one more clarification on Herzl's diary. Because, Rabania gives no fucks about what he just said. It's like, everything we've been talking about has been mostly 1948 before. Yes. It just reminded me of, a kid who's just, I'm just gonna like add like an irrelevant but true fact, and then so the teacher has nothing to say. But yes, that's right.
On Herzl's diaries. I mean, the other thing that I recall from those diaries is um, he was very preoccupied with, in fact, getting great power patronage, seeing
Yes.
Palestine, the Jewish state in Palestine, I think his words, an outpost of civilization against barbarism.
Yes.
In other words, very much seeing his project as a proxy for Western
No, I
imperialism
don't
in the
think
Middle
that's the right
East.
word. Not proxy. He wanted to establish a Jewish state which would be independent. To get that, he hoped that he would be able to garner support from major imperial powers.
Including the Ottoman Sultan,
Yes,
who he
yes,
tried to
exactly.
cultivate. I just want to respond to a point you made earlier, which was that people express their you made earlier in Sultan Palace. Just one clarification.
Talking about not from
State, that would be necessary, but it's not something which they were willing to translate into actual policy.
Okay,
just a
so-
quick pause to mention that for people who are not familiar, Theodor Herzl, we're talking about over a century ago. And everything we've been talking about has been mostly 1948 and before.
Yes, just one clarification on Herzl's diaries. I mean, the other thing that I recall from those diaries is he was very preoccupied with, in fact, getting great power patronage, seeing
Yes.
Palestine, the Jewish state in Palestine, I think his words, an outpost of civilization against barbarism.
Yes.
In other words, very much seeing his project as a proxy for Western imperialism in the Middle East.
Right word. Not proxy. He wanted to establish a Jewish state which would be independent. To get that word, not proxy. He wanted to establish a Jewish state which would be independent. To get that, he hoped that he would be able to garner support from major imperial powers,
including the Ottoman Sultan,
Yes,
who he
yes,
tried to
exactly.
cultivate. I just wonder.
He hoped that he would be able to garner support from major imperial powers,
including the Ottoman Sultan,
Yes,
who he
yes,
tried to
exactly.
cultivate. I just want to respond to a point you made earlier, which was that
Ooh, he's about to respond to Destiny. Get ready. Get ready, motherfucker. Get his ass.
people expressed their rejection of the partition resolution on the grounds that it gave the majority of Palestine to the Jewish community, which formed only a third. Whereas, in fact, if I understood you correctly, you're saying the Palestinians and the Arabs would have rejected any partition resolution.
Yeah,
I think
a couple things. That one, they would have rejected. Rejected any. Two, a lot of that land given was in the Negev. It was pretty terrible land at the time. And
Well-
then three, the land that would have been partitioned to Jews, I think would have been, I think I saw it was like 500,000 Arab. It would have been 500,000 Jews, 400,000 Arabs, and I think like 80,000 Bedouin would have been there. So the state would have been divided pretty close.
I think you raised a valid point. because I think the Palestinians did reject the partition of their homeland in principle. And I think the fact that the United Nations General Assembly then awarded the majority of their homeland to the Zionist movement only added insult to injury. I mean, one doesn't have to sympathize with the Palestinians to recognize that they have now been a stateless people for 75 years. Can you name any country, yours, for example, or yours, that would be prepared to give 55%, 25%, 10% of your country to the Palestinians? Of course not. And so the issue was not the existence.
He's cooking him. Do you notice that little he's like, you actually raise a great point. He's masterful at the calm, logical, he's everything these debate fucks wish they could be. Listen, let's roll that back. Listen to how he brings Stephen in by, he lets him get his points out, and he says, yeah, in fact, you raise a great point. I think you actually raise a great point, young man. And then just buries him.
It would have been 500,000 Jews, 400,000 Arabs, and I think like 80,000 Bedouin would have been there. So the state would have been divided pretty close.
I think you raise a valid point, because I think the Palestinians did reject the partition of their homeland in principle. And I think the fact that the United Nations General Assembly then awarded the majority of their homeland to the Zionist movement only added insult to injury. I mean, one doesn't have to sympathize with the Palestinians to recognize that they have now been a stateless people for 75 years. Can you name any country, yours, for example, or yours, that would be prepared to give 55%, 25%, 10% of your country to the Palestinians? Of course not. And so the issue was not the existence of Jews in Palestine. They had been there for centuries. And of course, they had ties to Palestine, and particularly to Jerusalem and other places, going back centuries, if not millennia. But the idea of establishing an exclusively Jewish state at the expense of those who are already living there, I think it was right to reject that. And I don't think we can look back now, 75 years later, and say, well, you should have accepted losing 55% of your homeland because you ended up losing 78% of it, and the remaining 22% was occupied in 1967. That's not how things work.
Yeah.
And I can imagine an American rejecting giving 10% of the United States to the Palestinians, and if that rejection leads to war and you lose half your country, I doubt that 50 years from now you're going to say, well, maybe I should have accepted that.
Sure. So
Okay. So he throws Steven off a little bit. Steven's going to be like, oh, well, I actually like that answer more than what I'm usually hearing, than what I usually feel like I'm hearing when it comes to the Palestinian rejection. And then okay. Here is his, his stalling, right? So first thing he does is he compliments the answer, and he tells him that it's different than other answers he gets from people when he debates. And then he goes on to criticize these other arguments he gets in and how it's different. And then Rabbani comes in and just says it was a matter of principle. And then he says it was an ideology problem in an agreeing tone. And Rabbani holds firm and says, no, it was a matter of principle. And Stephen again goes, yeah, ideologically driven. That they as a people had a right to or are entitled to this land that they've never actually had an independent state on, that they've never had even a guarantee of an independent state on, that they've never actually ruled a government. So we know that's not true. We were looking into like some early governments of Palestine. They had all kinds actually. It's a little hard when you're getting jerked around by the UK and the French and everyone, the Ottomans. You know, you've got it coming and going. But the reason that they don't have a state is not because they all suck. You fucking dipshit Pestiny. The reason they don't have a state isn't because they're all just like real sucky shit bugs and like they don't know how to be a state good. And that somehow matters. A stateless people. They have this weird ideology that even though they don't have a state, that they like have a right to like or are entitled to this land. Yeah, what a weird ideology that is, Stephen. That ideology that you have. Oh wow. What a crazy idea. I just hate ideologies that are so wacky, you know, like, oh, I deserve to live on this land, even though you never actually had an independent state. You've never even had a guarantee of an independent state. I think they did. I think, like, the UK at one point, I don't know if they guaranteed, but all but guaranteed, they implied heavily that they would be able to be their own independent state. So, fuck off with that shit. And then he's going to just try to hold on to that point. They both agree that the Palestinians rejected the partition resolution on principle, outright. No matter what percentage they offered, they rejected the idea of doing it. Do you remember that old story about splitting the baby? Wasn't that in the Bible somewhere? Where they split the baby? Contemporary English version. All right. One day, 2 women came to King Solomon, and one of them said, "Your Majesty, this woman and I live in the same house. Not long ago, my baby was born at home. 3 days later, her baby was born. Nobody else was there with us. One night, while we were sleeping, she rolled over on her baby, and he died. Then, while I was still asleep, she got up and took my son out of my bed. She put him in her bed. She put her dead baby next to me." Ooh, wow. How do you know, though? I mean, okay, maybe she'll find out. In the morning, when I got up to feed my son, I saw that he was dead, but when I looked at him in the light, I knew he wasn't my son. "No," the other woman shouted. "He was your son. My baby is alive." "The dead baby is yours," the first woman yelled. "Mine is alive." They argued back and forth in front of Solomon until finally he said, "Both of you say this live baby is yours. Someone bring me a sword." A sword was brought, and Solomon ordered, "Cut the baby in half. That way each of you can have part of him." "Please don't kill my son," the baby's mother screamed. "Your Majesty, I love him very much, but give him to her. Just don't kill him." The other woman shouted, "Go ahead and cut him in half. Then neither of us will have the baby." Did she say that after this woman said it? Said, just give it to her? Because it sounds like she's like, "I don't want him anymore." Because, like, The first woman just offered that she could have the baby. She could have said, yeah, just give him to me. Don't cut him in half. But instead she says, go ahead and cut him in half. I don't know if I buy this story. Unless, were they separated? And each could give their answer without hearing what the other person said? A little game theory kind of thing. Because otherwise, this is just not believable. Unless they're shouting at the same time, I guess. Solomon said, don't kill the baby. Then he pointed to the first woman. She is his real mother. Give the baby to her. Everyone in Israel was amazed when they heard how Solomon had made his decision. They realized that God had given him wisdom to judge fairly. I don't know, man. It's pretty convenient. I don't know. I feel like if you're pretending that it's your baby, you wouldn't just be like, yeah, cut him in half. You would at least be like, you don't even have to lie. Like she obviously is interested in having that baby, like wants it. So wouldn't she just have to be like, no, it's actually mine. But don't cut it in half. So I want to read the classic King James version. Then came there 2 women. They were harlots unto the king, and stood before him. They were harlots. They were harlots. He doesn't like these harlots. Look at all these like tools I have. Harlots. No. All right. And the one woman said, O my lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day after that I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also, and we were together. There was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night because she overlaid it. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while thine handmaid slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. Thus they spake before the king. Then the king said, The one saith, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is the dead. And the other saith, Nay, but thy son is the dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divided. Then the king answered and said, Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. All right, anyway, Fun story. So the one who rightfully owns the land does not want it to be divided. Huh? Huh? Eh? What do you think? That's what I think. All right. So Stephen's basically talking through the whole 6th minute, basically up into the 7th minute, with a bit of Rabbani interrupting here and there. Let's figure this out.
I like this answer more than what I usually feel like I'm hearing when it comes to the Palestinian rejection of the 47 partition plan. Because sometimes I feel like a weird switch happens to where the Arabs in the area are actually presented as entirely pragmatic people who are simply doing a calculation and saying like, well, we're losing 55% of our land. Jews are only maybe 1/3 of the people here, and we've got 45, and the math doesn't work basically. But it wasn't a math problem. I think, like you said,
it was a matter of principle.
It was an ideology problem.
No, it was a matter of principle. Matter of principle.
But it wasn't a math problem. I think, like you said,
it was a matter of principle.
It was an ideology. Problem.
No, it was a matter of principle.
Yeah, ideologically driven. That they, as a people, have a right to or are entitled to this land that they've never actually had an independent state on, that they've never had even a guarantee of an independent state on, that they've never actually ruled a government.
That last point is actually not correct, because for all its injustice, the mandate system recognized Palestine as a Class A mandate, which provisionally recognized the independence of that territory.
Of what would emerge from that territory, but not of the Palestinian.
It was provisionally recognized.
But not. But the territory itself was, but not of the Palestinian people to have a right or a guarantee to a government that would emerge.
It was a British mandate of Palestine, not the British mandate of Israel.
The word exclude.
Okay. So, terrible job, Stephen. So again, he spends a lot of his time just gabbing about other people who aren't in this debate and how they have different arguments that he wishes he could be arguing against. And then he quibbles over whether it was principle or ideology. Yeah, ideologically driven. And then he says that they've never ruled a government, they've never been guaranteed an independent state. So yeah, I was just saying, like, I don't think this is true. He's Rabbani tells us the mandate system recognized Palestine as a Class A mandate, which provisionally recognized the independence of that territory. And he says, of what would emerge from that territory, but not of the Palestinians. That's some bullshit. It was the British mandate of Palestine, not the British mandate of Israel. If they recognize a land that has a bunch of people on it as being an independent territory, that doesn't mean that the people who come and take it over and occupy it, those were the ones we meant to say were the independents. That's some rich ass bullshit. All right, looks like we're going to get a big old bunch of Benny and then some Destiny. Okay, Norm's going to come in about 10 minutes in, okay? All right. We're close. 7 minutes. All right. Well, let's keep going.
Exclusive, which you keep using,
Yes.
is nonsense. The state which Ben Gurion envisioned would be a Jewish majority state, as they accepted the 1947 partition resolution, as Stephen said. That included 400,000.
But the territory itself was, but not of the Palestinian people to have a right or a guarantee to a government that would
it
emerge
was a
from
British
it.
mandate of Palestine, not the British mandate of Israel.
The word exclusive, which you keep using, is nonsense. The state which Ben
Israel.
The word exclusive, which you keep using, is nonsense. The state which Ben Gurion envisioned would be a Jewish majority state, as they accepted the 1947 partition resolution, as Stephen said. That included 400,000 plus Arabs in a state which would have 500,000 Jews. So the idea of exclusivity wasn't anywhere in the air at all among the Zionist leaders in 47, 48. They wanted a Jewish majority state, but were willing to accept a state which had 40% Arabs. That's one point. The second thing is the Palestinians may have regarded the land of Palestine as their homeland, but so did the Jews. It was the homeland of the Jews as well. The problem was the Arabs were unable and remain to this day unable to recognize that for the Jews, that is their homeland as well. And the problem then is, how do you share this homeland? Either with one binational state or separate this, partitioned into two states. The problem is that the Arabs have always rejected both of these ideas. The homeland belongs to the Jews, as Jews feel, as much as it does, if not more, than for the Arabs.
Jews.
I would say for the Jews. It's the Jewish people's
I would also,
homeland.
real quick, I just
homeland, either with one binational state or separate this, partitioned into two states. The problem is that the Arabs have always rejected both of these ideas. The homeland belongs to the problem, but so did the Jews. They have regarded 40% Arab, 100,000 partition be exclusive, which you keep using, is nonsense. The state which Ben Gurion envisioned would be a Jewish majority state, as they accepted the 1947 partition resolution, as Stephen said. That included 400,000 plus Arabs in a state which would have 500,000 Jews. So the idea of exclusivity wasn't anywhere in the air at all among the Zionist leaders in 47, 48. They wanted a Jewish majority state, but were willing to accept a state which had 40% Arabs. That's one point. The second thing is the Palestinians may have regarded the land of Palestine as their homeland, but so did the Jews. It was the homeland of the Jews as well. The problem was the Arabs were unable and remain to this day unable to recognize that for the Jews, that is their homeland as well. And the problem then is, how do you share this homeland? Either with one binational state or separate this, partitioned into two states. The problem is that the Arabs have always rejected both of these ideas. The homeland belongs to the Jews, as Jews feel, as much as it does, if not more. Than for the Arabs.
Jews.
I would say for the Jews. It's the Jewish people.
I would also
homeland.
Real quick, I just want for both of you guys, because I haven't heard these questions answered. I really want these questions to be. I'm just so curious how to make sense of them. It was correctly brought up that I believe that Ben Gurion had, I think Shlomo Ben-Ami describes it as an obsession with getting validation or support from Western states, Great Britain, and then a couple decades later,
That
it became
explains the Suez war, the Suez crisis.
Exactly. Great Britain and then a couple decades later, it
That
become
explains the Suez War, the Suez
Yeah,
crisis.
exactly. Correct. That was one of the major motivators, the idea to work with Britain and France on a military
An
operation
imperial
against Arabs.
stooge.
But then the question again I go back to, if on a military
An
operation
imperial
against Arabs.
stooge.
But then the question again I go back to, if that is true, if Ben-Gurion, if the early Israel saw themselves as a Western fashion nation, how could we possibly imagine that they would have engaged in the transfer of some 400,000 Arabs after accepting the partition plan? Would that not have completely and totally destroyed their legitimacy in the eyes of the entire Western world? Would
No.
there not have been? How not?
Well, first of all, I think that the Zionist leadership's acceptance of the partition resolution, and I think you may have written about this, that they accepted it because it provided international endorsement of the legitimacy of the principle of Jewish statehood, and they didn't accept the borders. And in fact, later expanded the borders. Second of all,
No, they did.
But the borders
They did
were
accept the
expanded in
borders.
war.
They accepted the UN partition resolution. Borders and all.
they
That's how
accepted. They
it.
accepted.
You can say that some of the Zionists, deep in their hearts, had the idea that maybe
Well,
at some point
including
they
their
would be able to get more.
including
But
their
they
most senior
accepted-
leaders who said
Yes,
so,
but
and
they
I think you've
accepted-
quoted. Including
they
their
would
most,
be able to get more.
including their
they
most senior
accepted-
leaders who said
Yes,
so,
but
and
they
I think you've quoted them
but
as
they
saying so.
grudgingly accepted what the United Nations,
yes.
the world community,
Yes.
had said. This is what you're
Yes.
going to get.
And second. Second of all, I mean, removing darker
Dark?
people,
Jews are as dark.
it's
In
intrinsic.
Israel,
it's
in Israel,
intrinsic.
Jews are as dark as
it's
Arabs.
it's intrinsic to
nonsense.
Western history. So the idea that Americans or Brits or the French would have an issue with, I mean, the French had been doing it in Algeria for decades. The Americans have been doing it in North America for centuries. So how would Israel forcibly displacing Palestinians somehow besmirch Israel in the eyes of the West?
This is what you're
Yes,
going to get.
and second of all, I mean, removing darker people, it's
Jews. Dark.
it's intrinsic.
In Israel, Jews are
Intrinsic.
as dark as Arabs.
It's intrinsic. To
Nonsense.
Western history. So the idea that Americans or Brits or the French would have an issue with, I mean, the French had been doing it in Algeria for decades. The Americans have been doing it in North America for centuries. So how would Israel forcibly displacing Palestinians somehow besmirch Israel in the eyes of the world?
Not only is that a great argument, it's proven itself completely true today. Israel has not besmirched its identity in the eyes of governments, all kinds of Western governments. Think it's totally cool to just do fucking genocide. Just, you know, such a stupid argument by Stephen. Why would they genocide people if they thought if they wanted good standing in the Western world? Are you what are you, goofy? What are you, sir? Are you fucking goofy? You are the biggest dipshit moron in the world. What are you doing on this stupid debate? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? All right, we're about to have a treat. Finally, a reprieve. I think, or we're gonna get to hear more. What's his name? Norm Finkelstein, the star of the show. He looks like he's gonna go on for a little bit, so I'm gonna take a little bathroom break, and let's do that. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
This is a long day, you're gonna have to wait, because it's gonna take a long, long time for kudos to watch it all so slow, slow, slow. Oh, you may tell me it's ADHD, and yeah, that may be. If you hang out, you'll see that this is a long, big day, and you're gonna have to wait, because it's gonna take a long, long time for kudos to watch it all so slow, so slow, so slow. We watch the video, but then we stop and take it back. Make sure we understand every single point made. It doesn't matter if you have to wait 1 hour off to pay. Cover takes kudos stuff to do, but that's because he has to know it all and he doesn't know much yet. So learn along, let's learn along. Come learn along with kudos. Now this a long, big day, and you're gonna have to wait, because it's gonna take a long, long time for kudos to watch it all so slow, so slow, so slow, yeah. Ooh, 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 ooh. We watch the video, but then we stop and take it back. Make sure we understand every single point made. Doesn't matter if you have to wait 1 hour of debate. Cover takes kudos 12 to 2, but that's because he has to know it all and he doesn't know much yet. So learn along, let's learn along. Come learn along with kudos.
All right, here we go. Time for Norman Finkelstein. Let's hear what you got, buddy. Bring it home. Bring it home for us. Where are we? Even the 1944 resolution of the Labour Party, at the time, even Bertrand Russell was a member of the Labour Party, it endorsed transfer of the Arabs out of Palestine. Okay. As Moines pointed out, it was deeply entrenched in the idea in Western thinking. Yeah. All right, so I think Norm's just going to drive this point home even further. It was a very stupid point brought up by Destiny, but it elicits an interesting answer that is important for people to consider.
West.
Even in the 1944 resolution of the Labour Party, and at the time, even Bertrand Russell was a member of the Labour Party, it endorsed transfer of Arabs out of Palestine. As Moines pointed out, that was a deeply entrenched idea in Western thinking that there was nothing, it doesn't in any way contradict or violate or breach any moral values to displace the Palestinian population. Now, I do believe there's a legitimate question. Had it been the case, as you said, Professor Morris, that the Zionists wanted to create a happy state with a Jewish majority, but a large Jewish minority, and if by virtue of immigration, like in our own country, given the current trajectories, non-whites will become the majority population in the United States quite soon. And according to democratic principles, we have to accept that. So if that were the case, I would say maybe there's an argument that had there been mass Jewish immigration, changed the demographic balance in Palestine, and therefore Jews became the majority. You can make an argument in the abstract that the indigenous Arab population should have been accepting of that, just as whites in the United States, quote unquote whites, have to be accepting of the fact that the demographic majority is shifting to non-whites in our own country. But that's not what Zionism was about. I did write my doctoral dissertation on Zionism, and I don't want to get now bogged down in abstract ideas. But as I suspect you know, most theorists of nationalism say there are two kinds of nationalism. One is a nationalism based on citizenship. You become a citizen, you're integral to the country. That's sometimes called political nationalism. And then there's another kind of nationalism, and that says the state should not belong to its citizens, it should belong to an ethnic group. Each ethnic group should have its own state. It's usually called the German Romantic idea of nationalism. Zionism is squarely in the German Romantic idea. That was the whole point of Zionism. We don't want to be Bundists and be one more ethnic minority in Russia. We don't want to become citizens and just become a Jewish people in England or France. We want our own state.
Like the Arab 23 states.
No, wait. Before we get to the Arabs, let's stick to the Jews for a moment, or the
State.
No, Zionism, called ethnic group, should have its own state. It's usually called the German Romantic idea of nationalism. Zionism is squarely in the German Romantic idea. That was the whole point of Zionism. We don't want to be Bundists and be one more ethnic minority in Russia. We don't want to become citizens and just become a Jewish people in England or France. We want our own state.
Like the Arab 23 states.
No, wait. Before we get to the Arabs, let's stick to the Jews for a moment, or the Zionists. We want our own state, and in that concept of wanting your own state, the minority at best lives on sufferance and at worst gets expelled. That's the logic of the German Romantic Zionist idea of a state. That's why they're Zionists. Now, I personally have shied away from using the word Zionism ever since I finished my doctoral dissertation.
Was that painful?
Because, as I said, I don't believe it's the operative ideology today. It's like talking about Bolshevism and referring to Khrushchev. I doubt Khrushchev could have spelled Bolshevik. But for the period we're talking about, they were Zionists. They were committed to their exclusive state with a minority living on sufferance or, at worst, expelled. That was their ideology. And I really feel there's a problem with your happy vision of these Western Democrats like Weizmann, and they wanted to live peacefully with the Arabs. Weizmann described the expulsion in 1948 as, quote, the miraculous clearing of the land. That doesn't sound like somebody shedding too many tears at the loss of the indigenous population.
Let me just respond to the word unsufferance. The unsufferance I don't agree with. I think that's wrong. The Jewish state came into being in 1948. It had a population which was 20% Arab when it came into being. After Arab refugees, many of them had become refugees, but 20% remained in the country. 20% of Israel's population at inception in 1949 was Arab.
80% went missing.
No. We're talking about what
All right. I don't know if Rabbani was correct exactly with this, the 80%, because he's saying of the Jewish state, 20% of that was Arab. Not that it was 20% of the Arabs. If that makes sense. If they had, what did they have? They had 20%. Well, okay, they had at first. So in all of Israel, Palestine, there was Arab, Jew, right? 2/3 Arab, 1/3 Jewish. If they made a state and they took 100% of them, and then a portion of them, that meant that this green was now part of Israel. It's much more than 80% that are missing from it. But some of these already live outside of the boundaries. So I don't know. It's not clear. I don't think he was like to say 80% went missing, because according to what Benny Morris was saying, he's saying that 80% were Jewish and 20% were Arab. That's why he says, no, I was talking about what remained in Palestine, Israel after it was created. The 20% who lived in Israel received citizenship and all the rights of Israelis, except, of course, the right to serve in the army, which they didn't want to do. And they have Supreme Court justices, and they have Knesset members. And then Norm points out that they lived under emergency laws until 1966. The 20% who lived in Israel received citizenship and all the rights of Israelis. Did they, though? Oh, but you're under emergency laws for 100 years. For 120 years. All right. So he says this at 1606. So he's going on in that 06. Urbani pipes in and says 80% went missing. No. Okay, let's keep going.
I was talking about what remained in Palestine, Israel, after it was created. The 20% who lived in Israel received citizenship and all the rights of Israelis, except, of course, the right to serve in the army, which they didn't want to. And they have Supreme Court justices, they have Knesset members. They enjoyed
they lived under emergency laws until 1966.
For a period, sure. They lived under emergency.
So they didn't immediately have citizenship.
No, wait a
This
second.
is just fantasy.
At the beginning, it's not fantasy. At the beginning, they received basically, except, of course, the right to serve in the army, which they didn't want to. And they have Supreme Court justices, they have Knesset members. They enjoyed
lived under emergency laws until 1966.
For a period, sure. They lived under emergency.
So they didn't immediately have citizenship.
No, wait a
This
second.
is
At
just
the beginning,
fantasy.
At the beginning, it's not fantasy. At the beginning, they received citizenship, could vote in elections for their own people, and they were put into parliament. But in the first years, the Israeli, the Jewish majority suspected that maybe the Arabs would be disloyal because they had just tried to destroy the Jewish state. Then they dropped the military government and they became fully equal citizens. So if the whole idea was they must have a state without Arabs, this didn't happen in 49, and it didn't happen in the subsequent
then why did
decades.
you say, Professor Morris?
Yes.
Then why did you say with? Then why did you say, Professor Morris?
Yes.
Then why did you say without a population expulsion, a Jewish state would not have been established?
Because you're missing the first section of that paragraph, which was that they were being assaulted by the Arabs. And as a result, a Jewish state could not have come into being unless there had also been Arabs. Section of
why did you say without a population?
Didn't happen in the
then why did you say, Professor Morris?
Yes.
Then why did you say without a population expulsion, a Jewish state would not have been established?
Because you're missing the first section of that paragraph, which was that they were being assaulted by the Arabs. And as a
state would not have been established.
Because you're missing the first section of that paragraph, which was that they were being assaulted by the Arabs. And as a result, a Jewish state could not have come into being unless there had also been an expulsion of the population which was trying to kill them.
Norm, I'm officially forbidding you referencing that again.
I think
Hold on a second, wait. We responded to it. So the main point you're making, we have to take Benny at his word, is like there was a war, and that's the reason why he made that statement.
I think just one last point on this. I remember reading.
And that's the reason why he made that statement.
That's not good enough, buddy. Because there was a war, that's why he made that statement. It's not the one statement, dude. In case it wasn't like incredibly obvious that Lex is completely swinging for the pro-Israel side, this is when it comes full bore. He literally says, "I'm officially forbidding you from referencing that again because you have to just take Benny Morris at his word. You just have to accept his flimsy explanation." You know, there's less blatant ways to do that. You could say something like, "Well, let's move on from this topic." That's some bullshit right there.
I think just one last
Or you're making, we have to take Benny at his word, is like there was a war, and that's the reason why he made that statement.
I think just one last point on this. I remember reading your book when it first came out, and reading, you know, one incident after the other, and one example after the other, and then getting to the conclusion where you said the Nakba was a product of war, not design. I think were your exact. And I remember reacting almost in shock to that I felt you had mobilized overwhelming evidence that it was a product of design, not war. And I think our discussion today very much reflects, let's say, the dissonance between the evidence and the conclusion. You don't feel that the research that you have conducted and published demonstrates that it was in fact inherent and inbuilt and inevitable. And I think the point that Norm and I are making is that your own historical research, together with that of others, indisputably demonstrates that it does. I think that's a fundamental disagreement we're having here.
Can I actually respond?
Okay, so Rabbani beautifully laid out exactly what the problem is, which is that Benny is talking out two sides of his dumb fucking ugly ass, and he's saying the transfer of the Arabs was not inevitable and inbuilt in Zionism, even though I said that with my research and my words in my book. The whole reason I'm in the position of authority that I am today is through this research that I did, and fuck, and Lex is too fucking thick to get it, or he gets it and he wants to steer people away and wants to distract all the smooth brains away from him, and just saying like he's just taking it out of context. He's just clip chimping in from his book and taking him out of context and he already said that it was because of the war that they did it. Come on. Come on. And what on earth would Stephen Bonell have to say about this? What in the fuck would you have to say about this?
your own historical research, together with that of others, indisputably demonstrates that it does. I think that's a fundamental disagreement we're having here.
Can I wait? Yeah, can I actually respond to that? Because this is actually, I think this is emblematic of the entire conversation. I watched a lot of Norm's interviews and conversations in preparation for this, and I hear Norm will say this all over and over and over again. I only deal in facts. I don't deal in hypotheticals. I only deal in facts. I only deal in facts. And that seems to be the case, except for when the facts are completely and totally contrary to the particular point you're trying to push. The idea that Jews would have out of hand rejected any state that had Arabs on it or always had a plan.
Okay. Can I wait? Yeah, can I actually respond to that? Because this is actually, I think this is emblematic of the entire conversation. I watched a lot of Norm's interviews and conversations in preparation for this. And I hear Norm say this over and over and over and over again. I only deal in facts. I don't deal in hypotheticals. I only deal in facts. I only deal in facts. And that seems to be the case, except for when the facts are completely and totally contrary to the particular point you're trying to push. The idea that Jews would have out of hand rejected any state that had Arabs on it, or always had a plan of expulsion, is just betrayed by the acceptance of the 47 partition plan. Okay, the idea that Jews would have out of hand rejected any state that had Arabs on it is not a claim that anyone made in this debate. This is a straw man. Nobody's arguing that point. There's no need to say that. That's not a thing we say. Nobody was arguing that. You don't have to disprove it, because no one said that. Or always had a plan of expulsion. That is something that was said. So that's a half a point. So let's address the only point that matters, the one that was brought up. The idea that Jews always had a plan of expulsion. The idea that Jews always had a plan of expulsion is betrayed by the acceptance of the 47 partition plan. So he's so stupid. He's so fucking stupid. Okay, and Norm is gonna tear into him about not understanding politics, but let's tear into him first ourselves, because we played the song. The Arabs rejected outright the resolution. So what was Norm's whole point that he argued? Neither side was committed to the letter of the partition resolution. Moin Rabbani pointed out later that they agreed to the principle of the partition resolution, but they didn't agree to the borders. Didn't agree with the borders. Now, Benny is like, no, they agreed to it, borders and all. And it's like, okay, yeah. But once you have the state, where you put those borders can get fudged a lot easier than if you don't have a state, right? Just the whole principle of it. They're like, yeah, in principle, we're down with this. It'll give us a whole state with a border that we can enforce with violence. And we can move the border. We can put the border wherever the fuck we want. Just agree to it. So that's one thing. This whole first hour and 20 minutes have been full of a lot of examples of why they say that Arabs would be expelled from their land whether or not they chose to fight back. Because it was inbuilt and inevitable in their plan. Even the plan itself implied transfer. It didn't explicitly say it, but it would be the material reality on the ground that there would be expulsion of Arabic people. So Stephen, he is so full of fluff. It's babble, 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 babbly, babbly, babble. Right? Can I respond to that? Because this actually, I think this is emblematic of the entire conversation. I watch a lot of Norm's interviews and conversations in preparation for this, and I hear Norm will say this over and over and over again. Like, he has to emphasize it. He's like, Norm is so crazy. He says the same thing over and over and over again. I only deal in facts. I don't deal in hypotheticals. And then he repeats that again. And that seems to be the case, except for when the facts are completely and totally contrary to the particular point you're trying to push. What? And then this is, I guess, his example. The idea that the Jews would have out of hand rejected any state that had Arabs on it. Again, not an argument he made. Or always had a plan of expulsion is just betrayed by the acceptance of the 47 partition plan. He's like, you don't like to deal with facts except for when the facts aren't convenient for your case. It's exactly the same thing. Do you remember Pestiny's very first opener? I find it funny that nobody wants to talk about how the Jews accepted the 47 partition plan and the Arabs rejected it. I never hear anyone talk about that. It was stupid then because he did his opening statement well after Norm and Rabbani both talked about the 47 partition plan and how bad faith it was and how it was a bad idea and how it was and how they rejected it in principle. And it's like, he even had a back and forth with Rabbani about it. He had a whole back and forth. And he's like, you think that they would have like done that? It wouldn't totally destroy their legitimacy in the eyes of the Western world? How not? How not? Whatever. I'm not saying they have to agree with them, but the way he's saying the argument, he's saying it as if it hasn't been addressed yet. Or that you wouldn't, if you were arguing in good faith, you would know their position on that. You would already know their position. You're just trying to score stupid points. This isn't good faith at all. I watch a lot of Norm's interviews and conversations, and I try to catch him saying, I only deal with facts. I don't deal with hypotheticals. Dude, if you're just going to say, like, he says this over and over again, it really depends on the type of question, man. Some kinds of hypothetical questions are not worth discussing when there are facts at hand, right? I don't know. I don't know the context of Norm having said over and over again that he only deals in facts and doesn't deal in hypotheticals. Because I seem to remember a young man named Stephen Bunnell who said, handful of quotes. He said something about a diary. I feel that when you have this type of reading of history, what was it? Maybe it was in his second one. Oh, yeah. The issue that I run into is while you can find quotes from leaders, while you can find maybe desires expressed in diaries, I feel like it's hard to truly ever know if there would have been mass transfer in the face of Arab peace. Because I feel like every time there was a huge deal on the table that would have had a sizable Jewish and Arab population living together, the Arabs would reject it out of hand. Same fucking point. He's like, every time he talks, he just does a big preamble of fluff and nonsense and then says, well, the Arabs rejected the 47 partition plan and the Jews accepted it. It's like everything he's said has been boiled down to that. A couple of things. One, they would have rejected any two. And yeah, and he's like, not only did they reject it, they rejected it out of ideology. And like, what do you mean ideology? Out of principle. Yeah. Like the whole idea of it was bad. And he's saying like, oh, there would have been bad land given to the Jews. And then he comes back in and he's like, so, oh, I like your answer more because what I'm hearing, oh my God. He compliments Rabbani for not making the argument he usually hears, goes on to then describe and dismiss that argument that nobody made. Rabbani says it's a matter of principle. It was an ideology problem. No, it was a matter of principle. Yeah, ideologically driven. So Destiny doesn't want to say principle. Rabbani's not happy with just ideology, which I have to agree. It's not just this weird idea that they have that's unique to these people, that you can kick them off their land, that you can't kick them off their land. He reiterates the point that they never had an official state. He tries to make it sound like that's three different things. He's like, they've never actually had an independent state. They've never even had a guarantee of an independent state and that they've never actually ruled a government. He always does these little rule of three things. He takes one idea and just tries to turn it into three things. And this was a point that was brought up by Benny Morris in his second time speaking, and Rabbani dealt with that, and they dealt with it in more detail, that they were prevented from becoming a state. The next time Destiny talks, he goes, real quick, I just want for both of you, because I haven't heard these questions answered. I just want these questions to be answered. So this was, I think, a novel question, kind of. He said these early Zionists had an obsession with getting validation or support from Western states, Great Britain, and then a couple decades later it became, that explains the Suez War, the Suez Crisis. Yes, exactly, correct. That was one of the major motivators. The idea was to work with Britain and France. But the question I go back to, if that is true, if Ben-Gurion, if the early Israel saw themselves as a Western fascist nation, how could we possibly imagine that they would have engaged in transfer of some 400,000 He spits it out as if he's like so concerned about this. 400,000 Arabs after accepting the partition plan. Would that not have completely and totally destroyed their legitimacy in the eyes of the entire Western world? No. All of those countries that you just mentioned did that too. They do that. They expel the brown people out of their land. What are you talking about? And Benny trying to say, we were brown. Jews are dark. No, you fucking idiot. They're not talking about the dark, the white Jews. So then the next time Destiny talks, he just wraps back around to his very, very first point that Norm already explained in his very, very first opening argument, which is that they did have a plan for expulsion, even though they seemed to accept the 47 partition plan. They planned on breaking it. They planned on fudging it. They planned on taking the precedent that was accepting the idea of partitioning and enforcing their own borders with violence. They'll take that. The rest is just details. Exactly where those lines are. Who's going to fucking prove it? They can do whatever the fuck they want once they got the okay. Once they got that magic stamp. You're a state now, Harry. Once they got that, they're free to... They got it, man. So he's such an idiot. And I can imagine the frustration of Norm happening right here. Because first of all, he's like calling him out, trying to say like, "Oh, Norm, you're bullshit. You're full of shit. You say one thing, you do another. Oh, you deal with facts, huh? Guess not now. Guess not now. How about this here fact? The Jews accepted the 47 partition plan and the Arabs didn't. Booyah!" It's like, really? That's the fact? That's the fact. That's the fact that he can't deal with? The fact that he spent 10 minutes talking about in his opening statement? The fact that both of the opponents on this debate have talked at length about this? You're just going to pretend like not only did they not answer it, they're afraid of the fact. They don't like the fact. Hello there, Lamp. 8:14. Okay, that wasn't too long ago. That was like a minute ago. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for chat. Yeah, we're just barreling through hour 2. And we're getting to the spicy part. We're going to start seeing some back and forth because the next line is from Finkelstein, and he says, "I don't think you understand politics." I don't think you understand politics, Mr. Morelli. Mr. Bazzelli.
Plan of expulsion is just betrayed by the acceptance of the 47
I
partition
don't
plan.
think you understand politics. Did I just say that there is a chasm that separates your ideology from the limits and constraints imposed by politics and reality? Now, Professor Morris, I suspect, would agree that the Zionist movement from fairly early on was committed to the idea of a Jewish state. I am aware of only one major study, probably written 40 years ago, the binational idea in mandatory Palestine by a woman. I forgot her name now. You'll remember her.
I'm trying to.
Yeah, okay, but you know the book.
think so.
Yeah, she is the only one who tried to persuasively argue that the Zionist movement was actually, not formally, actually committed to the binational idea. But most historians of the subject agree the Zionist movement was committed to the idea of a Jewish state. Having written my doctoral dissertation on the topic, I was confirmed in that idea because Professor Chomsky, who was my closest friend for about 40 years, was very committed to the idea that binationalism was the dominant trend in Zionism. I couldn't go with him there. But Professor Morris, you are aware that until the Biltmore Resolution in 1942, the Zionist movement never declared it was for a Jewish state. Why? Because it was politically impossible at the moment until 1942. There is your ideology, there are your convictions, there are your operative plans, and there's also separately what you say in public. The Zionist movement couldn't say in public, we're expelling all the Arabs. They can't say that. And they couldn't even say we support a Jewish state until 1942.
You're conflating two things. The Zionists wanted
Destiny thinks he knows politics. Lol. Yeah, that's one of the biggest jokes in this whole thing. Is this fucker like being here and just making the dumbest arguments. And if you could, they sort of wash over. I think the reason they seem to work on people is that if you really aren't knowledgeable in what's happening, and if you're not able to pay attention and remember a lot of the earlier things that were said, he's able to like rephrase himself and reword himself to where he's repeating the same point, but you don't really get it. It doesn't seem like it. But once we like break these down and analyze them, he's just been nailing. He basically just has kind of 2 points. It's the partition agreement, the 47 partition agreement, and then the like, well, why would they do that? Because wouldn't that make them look bad in the eyes of the West? Like he's coming from like this weird like perspective of like, oh, Western nations are all good and moral. Right, the British and the French and the Americans, like they would never do atrocities. And even if they did atrocities, they would be punished for them because they know that it's not good to do those atrocities. And they set up memorials for the victims of those atrocities and everything. So why would they do that? Why would they do that? They would never do that, wouldn't they? That's the extent of his politics argument. So yeah, the dude doesn't even understand reality, let alone fucking politics. No, thank you, Destiny. No, thank you, sir. All right. And so then Norm points out very good, that, yeah, like they're not just going to say their idea as like an official platform position when it's obviously a little spicy, a little genocide-y. They have to be on the down low. It's a lot like anti-Semitism, Zionism. All right.
a Jewish
Couldn't even say like, we're plans, and there's also separately what you say in public. The Zionist movement couldn't say in public, we're expelling all the Arabs. They can't say that. And they couldn't even say we support a Jewish state until 1942.
You're conflating two things. The Zionists wanted a Jewish state.
All right. So Benny accuses him of conflating two different things. What are those two things? Also, what is binational? What is this binational state? One state solution is also called binational state. One state solution is a proposed approach to the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, stipulates the establishment of a single state within the boundaries of what was mandatory Palestine, consisting of the combined territories of Israel, the state of Palestine, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip. Owing to the hope that it would successfully deliver self-determination to Israelis and Palestinians in one country, thus granting both peoples independence as well as absolute access to all the land. Yeah. It's the only possible solution. So he's saying that there's 40 years ago, a woman, the binational idea in mandatory Palestine, she's the only one who tried to persuasively argue that the Zionist movement was actually not formally committed to the binational idea. But most historians of the subject agree the Zionist movement was committed to the idea of a Jewish state. Having written my doctoral dissertation on the topic, I was confirmed in the idea because Professor Chomsky, who was my closest friend for about 40 years, was very committed to the idea that binationalism was the dominant trend in Zionism. I could not go with him there. So they're not talking about who's for binationalism. He's describing how much they believe it's part of Zionist doctrine, the Zionist movement. So he's saying he disagrees with Chomsky, who says that true Zionism is binationalist. He says I can't go with him there. But Professor Morris, are you aware that until the Biltmore Resolution, God, all these fucking resolutions, in 1942, the Zionist movement never declared it was for a Jewish state. Why? Because it was politically impossible at the moment until 1942. There's your ideology. There are your convictions. There are your operative plans. There's your ideology. There are your convictions. Then there are your operative plans. There's also separately what you say in public. The Zionist movement couldn't say in public we're expelling all the Arabs. They can't say that. And they couldn't even say we support a Jewish state until 1942. A fundamental departure from traditional Zionist policy by its demand that Palestine be established as a Jewish commonwealth. The meeting was held in New York City at the prestigious Biltmore Hotel. Oh, that's why it's called the Biltmore Conference. The program had been described by a number of historians as a virtual coup d'etat within Zionism, since the movement's more moderate leaders were replaced by leaders with more aggressive goals. So this is 42. Conference reaffirmed their unequivocal devotion to the cause of democratic freedom and international justice. This conference offers a message of hope and encouragement to their fellow Jews in the ghettos and concentration camps of Hitler-dominated Europe and prays that their hour of liberation may not be far distant. Wow, so this was happening in 42? There's a whole thing. What's the difference between a state and a commonwealth? Was stepping beyond the terms of the Balfour Declaration, which had been reaffirmed as British policy by Churchill, that there should be a Jewish national home. A crucial step in the development of the Zionist movement, which increasingly saw itself as opposed to Britain, rather than a collaborator. It determined that henceforth Ben-Gurion and the Zionist executive in Palestine, rather than Weizmann, would lead the Zionist movement and determine policy towards the British. All right. So at first they asked for a home. What was it? A home for the Jews, according to the Balfour policy. A Jewish national home. Then to a Jewish commonwealth. Then to a Jewish state. All right. So Benny says he's conflating two things. What is he conflating? What is being conflated? Let's find out. I'm curious to know what he thinks he's conflating two things.
Yes. Correct. That things. The Zionists wanted a Jewish state, yes. Correct. That didn't mean expulsion of the Arabs. Saying, yeah. It's not the same.
Zionists wanted a Jewish state, correct. That didn't mean the expulsion of Arabs. That's not the same thing. They wanted a Jewish state with a Jewish majority. But they didn't have a majority. But they were willing, as it turned out, both in 37 and 47, and subsequently to have an Arab minority. In 37 was supposed to be a transfer, a large Arab minority. In 37, there was a transfer. I thought there was no transfer before 1947. I seem to remember Benny claiming that before, that there was no transfer before 1947, that it didn't even happen. All right, this is going to get messy. They're going back and forth. They're going to try to confuse us, but we won't let them.
A Jewish state, yes. Correct. That didn't mean expulsion of the Arabs. Saying, yeah. It's not the same thing. They wanted a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, but they were willing, as it turned out, both in 37 and in 47, and subsequently, to have an Arab minority, a large Arab minority.
There was a transfer.
They were willing to have a large Arab minority in the country, and they ended up with a large Arab minority in the country. 20% of the population in 49 was Arab, and it still is.
They ended up for about 5 minutes before they were expelled. They ended up.
It's not the same. A Jewish
42.
You're conflating two things. The Zionists wanted a Jewish state, yes. Correct. that didn't
That
mean
didn't mean mass
expulsion
expulsion,
of the
that's what I was
Arabs.
saying, yeah.
It's not the same thing. They wanted a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, but they were willing, as it turned out, both in 37 and in 47, and subsequently, to have an Arab
In
minority,
37, it was
a
supposed to be
large,
transfer.
a large Arab
In 37,
minority.
there was a
They
transfer.
were willing to have a large Arab minority
come
in the
on.
country, and they ended up with a large Arab minority in the country.
Oh,
20% of the
They
population
ended
in
up-
49
they
was
ended
Arab,
up-
and it still is.
They ended up for
21%.
about 5 minutes before they were expelled. They agreed to it until 47, and then they were gone by March 1949.
go.
What happened in between the rejection of the partition plan and the expulsion of the Arabs?
The Arabs launched a war.
Well, yeah. Well, I
That's
mean,
the
like,
point.
it wasn't random. Like, there's a potential
I
that
agree, it
even
wasn't random.
there was-
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
it
but
was by design.
you can
It
say
wasn't
that.
random.
You can say that, but in this case, the facts betray you. There was no Arab acceptance of anything that would have allowed for a Jewish state to exist.
Of course
Number
not.
one, and number two, I think that it's entirely possible, given how things happen after war, that this exists too. I think that it was no.
Then they were
In the country, Arab
Didn't mean mass
expulsion of the
that's what I'm
Arabs.
saying, yeah.
It's not the same thing. They wanted a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, but they were willing, as it turned out, both in 37 and in 47, and subsequently, to have an Arab
In 37,
minority,
it was
a
supposed to be
large,
transfer.
a large Arab
In 37,
minority.
there was a
They
transfer.
were willing to have a large Arab minority
come
in the
on.
country, and they ended up with a large Arab minority in the country.
Oh,
20% of the
They
population
ended
in
up-
49
they
was
ended
Arab,
up-
and it still is.
They ended up for
21%.
about 5 minutes before they were expelled. They agreed to it until 47, and then they were gone by March 1949.
go.
What happened in between the rejection of the partition plan and the expulsion of the Arabs?
The Arabs launched a war.
Well, yeah. Well, I
That's
mean,
the
like,
point.
it wasn't random. Like, there's a potential
I
that
agree, it
even
wasn't random.
there was-
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
it
but
was by design.
you can
It
say
wasn't
that.
random.
You can say that, but in this case, the facts betray you. There was no Arab acceptance of anything that would have allowed for a Jewish state to exist.
Of course
Number
not.
one, and number two, I think that it's entirely possible, given how.
Yeah, dude, he doesn't understand the position of his opponents. A Jewish state is an ethno-nationalist, racist, genocidal thing inherently. You can have a state where anyone can be whatever religion they want, but that's not a Jewish state. And like here was like, but in this case, the facts betray you. There was no Arab acceptance of anything that would have allowed for a Jewish state. And Rabbani just says, of course not. Yeah, Dick, that's what we're saying. We're saying that the Arabs outright rejected the partition resolution. This is not complicated. There's just a lot to untangle, but it is not complicated. It's not complicated. He's like, oh, but the facts betray you. What happened in between the rejection of the partition plan and the expulsion of the Arabs? The Arabs launched a war. Yeah, it wasn't random. There's a potential that even... Yeah, it wasn't random. Nobody said it was random. You can say that in this case, but the facts betray you. There was... That's just the same fucking point again. They're not going to allow you to carve up this land and say this place is only for Jews. Arabs, fuck off. They're not going to do that, even if it's a small percentage of the land or a big percentage of the land. They're not going to do it either way. That's what we've been arguing. That's what the other side's been arguing this whole time. You're useless, Destiny. You're fucking useless. Number one. And number two... That's number one? Yeah, that is number one. That is your number one argument. Number two, I think it's entirely possible, given how things happened after war, that this exact same conflict could have played out and an expulsion would have happened without any ideology at play, and that there was a people that disagreed on who had territorial rights to a land. There was a massive war afterwards, and then a bunch of their friends invaded after to reinforce the idea that the Jewish people, in this case, couldn't have a state. Okay, you know, the guy who attacks Norm for hypotheticals, literally every single thing he mentions, it's either the same fact that the Arabs rejected the partition resolution, or it's some kind of would have. It's some kind of this would have happened, this could have happened. There's no reason not to think that this couldn't have happened. Kind of bullshit. So it's entirely possible that this exact same conflict could have played out and an expulsion would have happened without any ideology at play, that there was a people that disagreed on who had territorial rights to a land. There was a massive war afterwards, and then a bunch of their friends invaded after to reinforce the idea that the Jewish people in this case shouldn't have a state. What? That this exact same conflict could have played out and then expulsion would have happened. What are you talking about? What? We got to listen to it, see if it makes any more sense hearing it directly from the doofus's mouth.
To exist. There was no Arab acceptance of anything that would have allowed for a Jewish state to exist.
Of course
Number
not.
one. And number two, I think that it's entirely possible, given how things happen after war, that this exact same conflict could have played out and an expulsion would have happened without any ideology at play. That there was a people that disagreed on who had territorial rights to a land. There was a massive war afterwards, and then a bunch of their friends invaded after to reinforce would have happened without any ideology at play. After war, that this exact same conflict could have played out and an expulsion would have happened without any ideology at play. That
Okay, he's saying, had there not been any ideology, everything that happened could have played out exactly as it has happened. How would you explain the vast, the enormous campaign of getting Jews from around the world to emigrate there, and the insistence on denying equal rights to Palestinians, denying rights of return to Palestinians? I mean, you could argue there would have been territorial wars and disputes, localized things, but it wouldn't have ballooned into the type of massive humanitarian crisis that we see laying before us now. It's beyond any kind of practical fighting for resources or for localized territory. So far beyond that. Without an ideology, I mean, it's a ridiculous argument. He's saying this all could have happened without ideology. Well, at the same time, he's also saying that it was the Arabs' ideology of assuming that they had a right to this land. That was the ideology. The people disagreed who had a territorial right to a land. Earlier, you insisted that itself is ideology. Having rights to a land, that's an ideology, you said. You criticized Rabbani quite insistently about that. You corrected him twice. You said, no, it wasn't principle, it was an ideology. It was a fucked up ideology they had. But now you're saying, had there been no ideology, it just would have been people who dispute the land, who dispute the rights to a land. You know? Silly boy. You're goofy. What are you, goofy? I think you're goofy.
That there was a people that disagreed on who had territorial rights to a land. There was a massive war afterwards, and then a bunch of their friends invaded after to reinforce the idea that the Jewish people in this case couldn't have a state. There could have been a transfer regardless.
Anything could have been, but that's not what history is about.
History is about Palestinian rejectionism to any peace deal,
As I
over
said,
and over and
as
over
I
again.
said,
And then he just returns back to his first argument. Like clockwork. So he made 2 points. First point was his same old point. We should call this his attack helicopter. That's his attack helicopter. And then he has his like hypothetical. Finkelstein comes in and says anything could have been, but that's not what history is about. And then he, a little bit annoyed, said history is about Palestinian rejectionism to any peace deal over and over and over again. He loves to do the triple over. You can't just say over and over again. Over and over and over again. Over and over and over again. Nah. Like, I don't know, man. Maybe add a couple extra and overs. Maybe it'll make it a little more persuasive. So, yeah, you just throw out your only argument, your attack helicopter. Say some bullshit hypothetical thing that could have been, which is meaningless. Good job, buddy. Good job.
when the ball was thrown into the court of the United Nations, they were faced with a practical problem. And I, for one, am not going to try to adjudicate the rights and wrongs from the beginning. I do not believe that if territorial displacement and dispossession was inherent in the Zionist project, I do not believe it can be a legitimate political enterprise. Now, you might say that's speaking from 2022 or 2020. Where are we
Four
now?
now,
Four now.
I think.
Okay. But we have to recognize that from nearly the beginning, for perfectly obvious reasons, having nothing to do with anti-Semitism, anti-Westernism, anti-Europeanism, but because no people that I am aware of would voluntarily cede its country.
Except for all the people that sold land voluntarily.
You can perfectly understand Native American resistance to Euro-colonialism. You can perfectly well understand it without any anti-Europeanism, anti-whiteism, anti-Christianism. They didn't want to cede their country to invaders.
I think you're
That's completely understandable.
You're minimizing the anti.
All right, let's roll this back. Going back to 121:45.
And they couldn't even say we support a Jewish state until 1942.
You're conflating two things. The Zionists wanted a Jewish state,
Yes.
correct? that didn't
That
mean
didn't mean mass
expulsion
expulsion,
of the
that's what I'm
Arabs.
saying, yeah.
It's not the same thing. They wanted a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, but they were willing, as it turned out, both in 37 and in 47, and subsequently, to have an Arab
In
minority,
37, it was
a
supposed to be
large,
transfer.
a large Arab
In 37,
minority.
there was a transfer.
They were willing to have a large,
transfer.
a large.
Right there, I think we hear Lex saying "nom." He doesn't want him to interrupt.
A large Arab
In 37,
minority.
there was a
They were
transfer.
willing to have a large Arab minority
come
in the
on.
country, and they ended up with a large Arab minority in the country.
Oh,
20% of the
They en- they
population
ended
in
up-
49
They
was
ended
Arab,
up-
and it still is
They ended up for
21%.
about five minutes before they were expelled. They agreed to
No,
it
no,
until
no,
47, and then they were gone by March 1949.
gone.
What happened? In between the rejection of the partition plan and the expulsion of the Arabs?
The Arabs launched the war.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, like, it's not. It wasn't random. Like, there's a potential
I
that
agree, it
even
wasn't random.
There was-
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
it
but-
was by design.
you can. You
It
can say
wasn't
that. You
random.
can say that, but in this case, the facts betray you. There was no Arab acceptance of anything that would have allowed for a Jewish state to exist.
Of course
Number
not.
one, and number two,
Of course not. Did you hear him? He said, "Of course not." It's just one. It's his only argument, and he doesn't. He doesn't even care that it was dismantled before he even opened his mouth. I almost feel sorry for him. Almost do, but don't. To be clear.
I think that it's entirely possible, given how things happen after war, that this exact same conflict could have played out and an expulsion would have happened without any ideology at play. That there was a people that disagreed on who had territorial rights to a land. There was a massive war afterwards, and then a bunch of their friends invaded after to reinforce the idea that the Jewish people in this case couldn't have a state. There could have been a transfer regardless.
Anything could have been, but that's not what history is about.
History Is about
yeah,
Palestinian rejectionism
okay.
to any peace deal
As I
over
said,
and over and
as
over
I
again.
said, anything could have been, but that's not what history is about.
History is about Palestinian rejectionism to
okay.
any peace deal
As I
over
said,
and over and
as
over
I
again.
said, when the ball was thrown into the court of the United Nations, they were faced with a practical problem. And I, for one, am not going to try to adjudicate the rights and wrongs from the beginning. I do not believe that if territorial displacement and dispossession was inherent in the Zionist project, I do not believe it can be a legitimate political enterprise. Now, you might say that's speaking from 2022 or 2020. Where are we now?
Four now, I think.
Okay. But we have to recognize that from
Finkelstein doesn't know what year it is. I wonder if they're gonna use that against him. I'm afraid if they're backed into too tight of a corner, they're gonna use that. I wouldn't put it past them to be like, really, the guy who doesn't even know what year it is. You're gonna trust the guy who doesn't even know what year it is? I've been to Israel. Right. They're gonna use that. Ooh, tough gaff from Finkelstein there. I don't like to see it. Ooh, it's like oh shit. This guy doesn't even know what fucking year it is. Oh, it's fine, man. I do the same thing. Doesn't mean you can't be right about something just if you don't know what year it is. That's always what they like ask you if they think you got knocked out or whatever. I'd be like, take me a second.
That if territorial displacement and dispossession, not believe that if territorial displacement and dispossession was inherent in the Zionist project, I do not believe it can be a legitimate political enterprise. Now, you might say that's speaking from 2022 or 2020. Where are we
Four
now?
now, I think.
Okay. But we have to recognize that from nearly the beginning, for perfectly obvious reasons, having nothing to do with anti-Semitism, anti-Westernism, anti-Europeanism, but because no people that I am aware of would voluntarily cede its country. You can
Destiny's going to come in and say, except for all the people that sold land voluntarily, no people that I'm aware of would voluntarily cede its country. Except for all the people that sold land voluntarily, says Pestiny. Oh, aren't you clever? Aren't you fucking clever? Let's talk about the English language. One people, two peoples, people, countable noun. A people is not the plural of person, okay? And I'm going to see if maybe find some kind of source that looks anthropological of of peoplehood. Is personhood. What is people? What is a people? A group of people that inhabit a place. To people. That's as a verb. Of a group to inhabit. The arid mountain regions peopled by warring clans. So, men, women, and children of a particular nation, community, or ethnic group. Right? This is when we use the word people, meaning a race, a nation, a tribe, a clan, a population. So this is a usage of the word people and this is, again, like I said, it's a countable noun. Notice it's singular is one, people, two, peoples, right? So we can have peoples of different countries. So if I'm referring to the peoples of the Amazon, I'm referring to these various tribes and communities, kingdoms, nations in different parts of the place that may have their own distinct language and culture and all that stuff. These are peoples as a countable noun. And it's referring to a race, a tribe. So, it can refer to all of these. So anyone in one nation together can be called a people. So he's saying of all these nations, all the nations in all the world, or none of them, he's saying, no people that I know of. Right? Basically saying if you go to any country, you ask those people, and in a collective sense, as much as you can collectivize what their desires are. If you can do some like wicked polling, like amazing, figure it all out, exactly what they want, and tell me that they would voluntarily cede their country. Now, Stephen comes in and he says, except for all the people that sold their land voluntarily, except for all the people. So this time, Pestiny said people as a plural noun. One person, two people. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, right? Let's go back to our dictionary. Human beings in general or considered collectively. The earthquake killed 30,000 people. A person, a human being regarded as an individual. In the plural would be people, right? Human being, individual, being, soul, creature, fellow, character, chap, geezer. So, person could be in plural, goes to people. Right? Sometimes we say persons. What is persons? Category used in the classification of pronoun, possessive determinators, and verb forms. First person, second person, third person. Each of the three modes of the being of God, namely the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which together constitute the Trinity. Wow, that gets number 3 in Oxford Dictionary under person. Persons is a very formal word. We only use it in rather legalistic contexts. Notice in a lift, any person or persons found in possession of illegal substances will be prosecuted. To refer to the group of human beings or humans in general, we use people. I saw 3 people standing on the corner. Jim and Wendy are such nice people. 3 people were interviewed for the job, but only 1 person had the right qualifications. 3 people sold their land, but only 1 person made a profit. Okay, so Destiny is doing conflation. It doesn't matter if 10,000 people sold their land. That's not the same thing as partitioning the country and saying this part Arabs aren't allowed in. This part's for only Jews. Except all the people that sold land voluntarily. Yeah, man. Also, the selling the land, if you're gonna follow like whatever country's legal, that I would argue that it was illegitimate. If it's like British people selling the land to Jewish people or whatever, if there's something fucky going on, it's not necessarily like all fair, just deals in terms of buying and selling. From my understanding, like they're buying from like supposed landlords and they're just driving people who are quote unquote squatting on the land who quote unquote never possessed it, so they can't be dispossessed from it because they didn't have like, you know, legal papers or something. That kind of shit, that doesn't count as being like fair or just or not something that's worth like going to war over. Those are acts of war, acts of genocide. Even if on paper you can construe it as being a sale. Oh, they sold it voluntarily. Look, that's their signature right there on the dotted line. They did it. Right? But that doesn't mean the people would how did he put it? He said, no people that I'm aware of would voluntarily cede its country. Notice the pronoun, it's the possessive adjective, its. No people would cede its country. That's how I know he didn't mean people as in the plural of persons, because he would have said there. He would have said no people would want to cede their country, right? If that's what he meant, if he was just talking about people, if Norm had been talking about just a couple of people, who would sell land to someone, he would have said there. But he didn't. He said it's, because he was talking about a singular. I don't know. There are no people that I know. This people will not sell its land. That's our possessive pronoun here. No apostrophe. Don't fucking play with me. Ding, 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 ding. Fucking pronouns. You don't like it when I teach you pronouns. No people will cede its country. No people that I'm aware of would voluntarily cede its country. No people that I'm aware of would voluntarily cede its country. Yeah, he's talking about people as in the nation. The nation would not voluntarily cede itself, its country. That is not the same as land being sold. Especially when it's done not necessarily by people who are representatives of the country. How would you characterize that as people voluntarily ceding their country? Someone trapped into a deal where the only thing, their only choice is to sign the white paper and sell the land. You know, I think Benny said in some cases they were still allowed to live there. In other cases they were driven out. So fuck, man. So that's little Weasley, man. Little dumb shit. Pestiny. He does a conflation. He says he interrupts in the middle of this point that Norm is making. He has to, because Norm was fucking cooking with fire. Norm was cooking with fire. Destiny gets scared, and he's like, I gotta say, oh, no people would voluntarily cede its country, except all the people that sold land voluntarily. And we're gonna watch his fucking facial expression when he says this. He thinks this is a fucking zinger. I think he's gonna like roll his eyes as in like, oh, you're so impossible. But he's also going to be, like, very proud of himself. Especially for being able to get his point in quick. Watch this.
All the people that sold land voluntarily
cede its country. You
can all the people that sold land voluntarily.
You can perfectly understand Native American resistance to Euro-colonialism. You can perfectly well understand it without any anti-Europeanism.
Unfortunately, the camera cut away really quickly from Pestiny, so we didn't get to see the smugness. I just imagined it. Imagine the smugness. Imagine all the smugness. All right, could get rid of that. All right, so oh yeah, this is hour 1. Definitely red, blue, purple dominated, just a splash of green. Hour 2, how it's shaping up so far is we're looking at more red and purple. But the blue and green are coming back a lot, but not giving long talks. Now, speaking for a long time doesn't necessarily mean it's substantive. You know, could be this. That could also be, if there's a bunch of nonsense, it could be gish galloping. Destiny doesn't really gish gallop. He just kind of gishes in little spurts to keep it from getting too obnoxious. But all of his points are bullshit and repetitive. He will just rephrase his first argument in different ways. I think we've actually got three. We've got Arabs voluntarily sold land. He brought that up in his opening. They rejected the partition resolution, and they don't know how to do diplomacy. They only know war, right? And he's saying it would have happened. He's kind of saying they would have done that whether or not the Jews like were Zionists or not. I don't know. We're getting close to 3 hours here. We're about 25 minutes in almost. Let's see if we can keep going a little bit more.
Native American resistance.
Voluntarily.
You can lead its country.
Except
You
for
can
all the people that sold land voluntarily.
You can perfectly understand Native American resistance to Euro-colonialism. You can
I'm curious if they ever concede that, or if they're going to argue against that, of Native American resistance to Euro-colonialism. Would they argue that the Native Americans never had any right to fight the Europeans? Because that'd be a wild take. You gonna go there?
You can perfectly well understand it without any anti-Europeanism, anti-whiteism, anti-Christianism. They didn't want to cede their country to invaders.
I think
that's completely understandable.
You're minimizing the anti-Semitic element
You
in
minimized
Arab
in
nationalism.
all your books, you minimized.
No. No, Husseini was an anti-Semite. The leader of the Palestinian national movement in the 30s and 40s was an anti-Semite. This was one of the things which drove him, and also drove him in the end to work in Berlin for Hitler for 4 years, with giving Nazi propaganda to the Arab world, calling on the Arabs to murder the Jews. That's what he did in World War II. That's the leader of the Palestinian Arab national movement.
Why is it?
And he wasn't alone. He wasn't alone.
Why is it, if you read your book, Righteous victims, you can read it and read it and read it and read it, as I have. You will find barely a word about the Arabs being motivated by anti-Semitism.
It exists, though.
Even I didn't say it doesn't exist.
You agree that it exists.
Hey, I don't know
barely a word means it exists. So Benny is just like grasping for anything to argue with. And it's like, when he says you read it and read it and read it and read it, and you find barely a word about the Arabs being motivated by anti-Semitism. So he's arguing that relative to all of the stuff you're writing, you would think there would be more on this. Earlier, Benny Morris tried to argue that there was only a little tiny paragraph in all of the diary entries of that one guy. And it shouldn't really be counted. And here, Norm is making a similar argument, which is saying if anti-Semitism from Arabs is really what is the driver of this, why is it not prevalent throughout the story that you yourself have written? And you did write a little bit of it, a very little bit, which is not what you'd expect if it was the main driver of the story. You'd expect it to crop up more rather than just this tiny little bit. And then so his counter is, it exists though. And Norm correctly says, I didn't say it doesn't exist. Now, I think that's a mistake. That's a mistake I would make too. I would try to correct the record as well. Because this is the first way that sophists will get you. When you're arguing with the squirrely person, what you're going to notice is no matter how well prepared you are, as soon as you get into your motion, you're going to find yourself saying, I didn't say blah, 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 blah. I never said blah, 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 blah. Or nobody is saying blah, 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 right? That's going to be one of the first obstacles they're going to throw at you. They're going to put some fucking dumb words in your mouth, and you're going to have to say, I didn't say that. Instead of taking the bait, here's what you should do if you can try to if you find yourself in this situation. You'll find barely a word about the Arabs being motivated by anti-Semitism. It exists, though. Yep. And just keep going. It exists, though. Right. And hey, I don't know a single non-Jew who doesn't harbor anti-Semitic sentiments. That's Benny. Or is it Benny? Talking about Arabs. Who says that a non-Jew who doesn't harbor anti-Semitic sentiments?
I know a single non-Jew who doesn't harbor exists.
You agree that it exists.
Hey, I don't know a single non-Jew who doesn't harbor anti-Semitic sentiments.
We're talking about Arabs now.
Yeah, but I don't know anybody. That's just part of the human condition. Just
Anti-Semitism.
Yes,
Husseini was an ordinary
And among the Arabs.
Ooh, this is pissing me off. They won't even let him finish the sentence. It's one thing if you won't let him completely finish his point, by kind of cutting him off after the first two sentences. Whatever, that's one thing. That's shit. That sucks. But this shit, not even letting him get a word out? This is about to get crazy. Dude, I think the middle half of hour 2 is where we're about to, or the middle section, because I'm at about 26 minutes now. And I'm getting the sense that this is going to go off the fucking chain. So we're going to go ahead and stop it for now. Stopping it for tonight. That was a good long stream. We stopped off at 1:26:12. We'll pick this back up next time. All right. So hey, remember, it is not complicated. There's just a lot to untangle. All right. It's not complicated at all. Anyone can understand it. It's clear as day. Once you've deconstructed some of the tangles. Once you get rid of the tangles, it's nothing. It's super easy. And getting rid of the tangles is gonna be, depends on the kind of questions you have. If you watch this and you're listening to this part and you're still not pro-Palestine, I want you to ask yourself what it is that's keeping you from being pro-Palestine. Write it down. Write it in the comments. And we'll talk you through it. All right? See you later. Have a good one. We'll be back.